And hello, my name is Denny Paul May, and I'm a due process consultant with Kentucky Valley Educational Cooperative. And I want to welcome each and every one of you to today's session on special factors of the IEP. It's certainly a pleasure for us to host you today, and we appreciate you joining in with us. And so I say we get started. And the first thing that I want to do is talk about what we're hoping to accomplish today, which is always a good way to start a lesson. We're going to look at key components of the IEP. In particular, we're going to look at special factors, and we're going to look at the documentation and just break those special factors down in your mind's eye. If you're working with IEPs, it typically hits around the second page to third page of the IEP, and it is a place where you are going to document special factors. And the one thing that I can say up front on special factors is there is quite a bit of language, quite a bit of literature out there in regards to the internal consistency of the IEP. So if you, for example, raise some information in the present level that speaks to a student's behavior or speaks to the student's communication difficulties or speaks to the student's need for a calculator, then throughout the IEP, we should see different checkpoints along that IEP. And one of those checkpoints is the special factors section on the IEP. And so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're not in person today, but what I wanted you to do is I wanted you to think and I wanted to just kind of poll the audience. And um, I would like to see what you have to say about um, the topic of special factors. I would like to know how much interaction you've had with it at this point. I know several of you are new. I see the names down through there. Um, you know, write down what you think their purpose is. What are your issues in working with special factors as you're trying to develop an IEP? This is not a section that you can gloss over. If there are issues raised in the present levels that hit one of these special factors, there's five of them, and we're going to get to that. Uh, you know, English language learners, the need for Braille. If you have a student that's deaf, you have assistive technology that's needed to make progress. Those are the types of things that we're talking about. If you don't care, to just take a minute, type in some impressions from this screen right here in particular. What is it that you know about special factors? What is it that's hard about special factors? What are some of the components of special factors? What are your issues? What's your experiences at this point? So without further ado, let's move on and let's just talk about um, what special factors are. Special factors are considerations of an IEP team that must be addressed when developing or reviewing the IEP. And it doesn't matter. This is one of those federal mandates in terms of IEP development. It doesn't matter if you're working in Ohio, Florida, or whatever. You're going to see some portion of that on an IEP. And it's to ensure that a student's needs related to the specific areas are met so that students can benefit from special education related services. The Individual with Disabilities Education Act lists five special factors that the I team must consider. And so let's look at that here. Uh, the first one is behavior. And like April said, that's the one that you're going to see most commonly addressed because lots of times behavior is one of the things that we're dealing with when we're dealing with writing an IEP. And so if we go over into the present level and we see some data in there and some present level statements about a student's performance, and we see that under the social emotional piece, he's off task, or he doesn't complete task, or he has a tendency to call out inappropriately, then can we effectively answer that question? Um, does the student's behavior impact their ability to learn? And does it impact others' ability to learn? And so if it does, then you have to address it. So if you have it started out in the present level and then you go over to the special factors and you don't address it, then that is going to be an ineffective way of writing your IEP. So what's required under behavior is we get into it. Ideal, the team must, in the case of a child whose behavior impedes the child's learning or that of others, consider the use of positive behavioral interventions and supports and other strategies to address that behavior. Special factor number one is behavior. And when the IEP meeting rolls around to considering the special factors, the team might begin by asking, does the child's behavior interfere with his or her learning or the learning of others? Now, let me poll the audience. Is there a particular disability category that is a no, there's no, it's not up for discussion? You have to address behavior as a special factor if a student has a particular disability category. Is that a myth or is that something that's true? What do you think about that question? And if it is true, what is the disability category that you're going to see in special factors behavior more than likely? You can see autism. Exactly. We deal with a lot of that, right? That's one of those special factors. Now, do all students with autism, do all students with autism have behavior issues to the degree that they it impedes their learning or the learning of others? Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. EBD's one especially. And then OHI is the other one, other health impaired. When a student is attention, ADHD, OHI, the State Department has addressed those two as being typically those special factors that you're going to have to answer under behavior. Okay. So, for example, if you are OHI and you have a goal for behavior that's going to either increase your on-task behavior or decrease, some negative behaviors that you're displaying, then you're going to have a charge to look for some positive behavior intervention strategies. So when we think about behavior, we have to make sure that we have if we raise that need at the present level, that then we address it with positive behavior intervention strategies and supports. Now, it's been around since 1997. It was put in as a preventative measure for teachers. It was started in terms, it kind of goes hand in hand with the RTI process. And it really started out as a school-wide behavioral intervention program. And it has its roots back with applied behavior analysis. And this is a prevention approach, whereas we're looking to see what's the function of the behavior. We're looking to see what is the student gaining from the behavior, and can we replace those pieces with positive behaviors rather than providing them with punitive damages or PBIS is not a treatment or therapy. It's a framework or an approach for providing evidence-based strategies. And so we really want to think about, and Dr. Terry Scott at the University of Louisville talks about this a lot. He talks about taking the time to find those peer-reviewed strategies that work for students. And that's really what we want to see in that documentation under that behavior special factor. We really need to address, and it needs to be peer-reviewed. Now, one way of doing that, you can you can Google it, you can use your artificial intelligence, and it may or may not give you a great answer, but you then can check it through the Special Ed Connection, or if you're currently in a program like at the University of Cumberland's, you can check those peer-reviewed resource citations and references through those like Special Ed Connection or your own university's library. And what you want to make sure is that there's some peer-reviewed research behind that it actually does work before you use it. And so, you're replacing, you're teaching coping skills, in in the old days of special ed, and I've been in special ed a long time. And like I said, my name's Denny Paul May, and I was a director, and I was a teacher, and I was a diagnostician. I did a lot of things in special ed. But back in the old days, we would just when we got a diagnosis medically, the first thing we thought about was how can we throw this back to the medical profession and let them diagnose the student a little deeper and maybe provide them some medicine that's going to take care of this problem. Well, that's kind of a, a bad approach, but that's kind of how it started. And my experiences with it, sometimes medicine works and sometimes it doesn't. So we as teachers should not be trying to be a doctor. We should be more about teaching students how to cope and really addressing the behavior with strategies that we can teach the student that are going to go with them down the hallway, out the door, into their homes, into their school, I mean, into their churches, into their places of employment. And it's something that can really build on their ability to cope within the environment. So we're looking for evidence-based behavioral interventions. We're not looking for um, we're not looking for uh, punitive damage or punitive punishment. We're looking for more what can we do to work with the student because that's the intention of the IEP. So PBIS is not a treatment or therapy, but it is a strategy, and it's a system of strategies. And we try one thing and we take data on it, and we see if we can replace the negative behavior with the positive behavior. Now, what's research say about PBIS? When PBIS is implemented with fidelity, school communities thrive, uh, students demonstrate fewer negative behaviors, teachers report feeling less burnout and have higher levels of self-efficacy. So those are all good reasons. Schools have fewer office referrals to kind of work through. And in addition to promoting positive behavior, PBIS presents a move away from traditional discipline models, uh, such as in and out of school suspension. Research shows that out of school suspension does not change a student's behavior, it reinforces it. Or can have a detrimental effect on the student's behavior. Now, right on this screen over here, we have some PBIS resources that can give you some ways of looking for those strategies and can give you some tried and true strategies that work around behavior because we know this is one of the big major special factors. And we know that we just want to, in an informational type topic, we want to say, okay, we should have consistent present level information that discusses and documents the student's need for behavior intervention. Then when we go over there, we can't mark that special factor as no. We have to mark it as yes, and we have to address it with PBIS. And then as we move on through, there may be some things that we need to use, like a timer that we would put in the supplementary aids and services, so we have consistency there. We may also need a level of support that requires a goal and progress monitoring. And certainly we would see that. Sometimes we have to go with functional behavioral assessments that are going to go look at the antecedent behavior, the consequences, and the behavior and when it occurred. So that ABC kind of thing. We would also look at that FBA as identifying the root of that behavior. What is because behavior really has two functions. It helps you to avoid something or it helps you to get attention. And so when we think about behavior, that's what we need to be thinking about. And we need to think about then how can we address it in a positive manner so that we can teach kids how to cope. We can teach kids, I'll tell you a quick story about myself even. There's times, when uh, life gets a little iffy, it gets a little tough. And sometimes we deal with that by having a little anxious moment. Okay. And one of the things that helps me with my anxious moments is just to be in a quiet place and just to touch my forehead with a little bit of force and a little bit of pressure, just a pressure point. I've taught myself that when I get those anxious feelings, that if I will do that, that will cause those anxious feelings to subside a little sooner. And so that's just one thing that we're talking about. Finding that niche with that student, creating that relationship, taking care of their basic needs, then understanding why they're acting out and getting really to the root cause of why they're acting out, and then finding a strategy like the one that I just told you about to really attack and address. And some of it's much more difficult than what I just explained. I know we have students that are not used to being in structure and they get into situations where they're really struggling and maybe, they're having outbursts and it's really disruptive. And so we got to really think about intentionally finding those peer-reviewed strategies that work with those difficult students. And we need to set goals and we need to take data and let the data drive our next steps uh, in every case. Now, PBIS can be part of your RTI or your MTSS program and should be, but it doesn't take the place of that. It's part of that system. It's an MTSS is multi-tiered systems of supports. RTI is response to intervention. Those are organizational frameworks. And MTSS ensures that all students' needs are met through increasingly targeted interventions across three levels of support. MTSS encompasses academics, life skills, and behavior. PBIS is part of an overarching MTSS or providing tiered behavior support for students. Districts often implement PBIS as part of their holistic MTSS approach. So, what are the tiers of PBIS? Well, the tiers of PBIS are over here in the right. If you look at that graphic, universal supports for all students. Like you may have, um, you know, certain rules that you establish early on, or you may have uh, an intercom announcement that reinforces how students are supposed to behave. You may have an acronym that students learn that reinforces those behaviors. You may have established rules uh, of how to behave in the hallway or how to behave in the lunchroom. Those are all universal supports for students, okay? And then you might get into some targeted tier two supports, like one that we always hear of is check in or check and connect or check in, check out. That's a targeted support. Then when you move to that tier three intensive supports, you're talking about goals, you're talking about strategies, you're talking about taking data, and you're talking about really focusing in on what that student's needs are based on a functional behavioral assessment, a behavior intervention plan, and you really get into a real deep behavior intervention. Now, PBIS can also be used with RTI, and we know that we use that through universal screening. We are going to progress monitor that. We would even progress monitor those tier ones and those tier two supports. But when it gets to that tier three level, then we're looking at students that are probably or maybe need an IEP. So that's a child find kind of issue. And so we want to think about that as well. That we should be dealing with behavior across the board at all school levels, tier one, tier two, tier three. All of those should be available to students across the board in our RTI and MTSS programs. So tier one, universal, those are school-wide expectations. This is kind of a review of tiers one, two, and three we've already talked about. Uh, and schools and districts establish tier one behavior practices for all students with the goal of decreasing the number of escalating behavioral issues. That's what that slide says. And then tier two, of course, slightly more targeted support that prevents serious behavior challenges before they start. And then tier three is the most intensive with a few students receiving these supports. And these are where you start to see the behavioral challenges. Maybe need a behavior specialist. Okay. And then there, right here is 20 evidence-based high school interventions for your MTSS. That is a strategy for high school students, but those strategies also work for elementary students. I really liked it. It's accessible. You have to put your information in when you go to that. The next one is just really considering as if we go back to our previous slide, um, we're going to jump to uh, this visual impairment section here, and I want to talk to you about Braille. And typically, if a student has vision impairment, they have a vision teacher, okay? And but the problem is when you have a student that has vision impairment, sometimes you may have them on your caseload as well if they also have some concomitant types of disabilities. And so we're going to talk about this as a special factor, whereas lots of times this section will be handled by the vision teacher. We still want to talk about it just a little bit as a special factor here. So let's get back over here to it. ARCs must have or base decisions on functional vision and learning media assessments. Now, this is very specialized information. This, like I said, it's for the special vision teacher. Before deciding if Braille instruction is needed, the ARC must review data from the functional vision and learning media assessment. This assessment typically conducted by a teacher of visually impaired. See, I said that. uh, how the student uses vision and senses to access information. So if you're the folder holder because the student has multiple disabilities, or if you're working, or if the student has an intellectual disability as well as a vision impairment, um, then you would have to work together to plan the program. Um, and so what Braille is a system whereby a student that has low vision or no vision can learn to read with raised different types of lettering on their page. And so, this comes up as a special factor, um, and it can impact reading efficiency and literacy potential. It can really present some problems with access to the curriculum. And so we need to do that in conjunction with a teacher of the visually impaired. So if you run into that situation, you've got a student that's got low vision or is blind, you need to think about it. And if they have vision issues and if it's progressing, we need to be in tune with that as well as a special factor. Because if, like, I'll give you an example. I had a student one time that had rod cone dystrophy. And it's in keeping with if you were to put your fingers up over your eyes and just make like binoculars, that's kind of how their vision becomes. And it become and it and that vision is progressively their field of vision gets smaller and smaller over time. And so we would need to teach that kid to read and plan to teach that kid to read because we wouldn't presuppose that something might come up in medicine that would help them with their vision down the road. So we would make hay while we could, so to speak, teach them to read, but then also plan for if they are losing their vision progressively, we would need to plan for some braille instruction from a teacher of the visually impaired. And so that would be the needs that we would see. So if that comes across and you see you've got a kid that comes their developmental delay, then they qualify for mild mental disability, but then you notice also, man, they have some real vision issues. They have real when I look at their medical information, it's 2060, 2070, 2080 vision. You really need to look below the surface as the teacher of record there and make sure that you're addressing all those needs as a special factor for that student because it's going to impact access, it's going to impact reading, it's going to impact the way they do math, it's going to impact the way they write. And then if it's progressive, then we need to get that teacher of vision impairment involved. And that may require a call to your director of special ed and let them help you with getting the proper people in the proper places. So we're going to skip through here some things on this. Um, One of the things that you would think too, with any of these special factors, assistive technology needs to be considered first with Braille. And so you would work again with your vision teacher, and you would list that in your section of your supplementary aids and services. You would have it listed in your present levels, and it might even show up in a goal at some point, depending on the student's needs. So that the consistency across the IEP, the internal consistency is what we're after. Documentation requirements in Kentucky. In Kentucky, the IEP form, the blind or visually impaired special factors includes a prompt for the ARC to indicate whether Braille instruction was considered needed and how that decision was made. Okay. The Kentucky Department of Education expects the ARC to document data sources like the functional vision learning media assessment, vision reports from the doctors, and describe the instructional methods and materials that are needed and whether or not you've used technology, and then align your Braille goals to the general curriculum, especially in reading and writing standards, because that's where it shows up the most. So the professional responsibilities for the special ed teacher when you have Braille, even if a TVI delivers Braille instruction, the special ed teacher will still need to monitor the IEP implementation and progress, coordinate services and scheduling, and ensure the accommodations are in place across settings because that student may there's a good likelihood they're not going to spend all day with you. So you need to make sure that all these things are going on and then communicate with the families about the progress and the accessibility and then participate in ARC meetings to ensure Braille related services are reviewed and updated as the student needs change. We now get to limited English proficiency. And this is where a student can be absolutely both English learner and a student with a disability. Now, uh, both IDEA and ESSA, that's the big overarching laws that drive what we do with students in public schools. Uh, both of those laws require that EL students with disabilities receive both sets of supports, language instruction, special ed services. Okay. Schools must not delay or deny special education evaluation because of limited English proficiency. And so if you've got a student, sometimes we'll have a student that speaks Spanish in the home. If they've been immersed in that, we have to give them a little bit of time to respond to the English instruction. But there's also a test that they have to take through the Access program, and we certainly want to be in tune with that. If they present as a student with a disability after some time, according to the Kentucky's IEP guidance document and federal law, when developing the IEP, the ARC must consider the language needs of the student as they relate to the IEP. This is one of the required special factors in the IEP. And so you would raise what the special factors are, that the English language proficiency, the limited English proficiency, and how we're taking care of that together in the special factors section. What's the impact on access to instruction and possibly assessment? Okay, and so we would need to note that. Both the IEP and ELP plans serve different but complementary purposes. The IEP focuses on disability related needs that affect learning, and the ELP, or the English Learner Plan, focuses on English language development, listening, speaking, reading, and writing in English. Together, they form a comprehensive support plan, and the ELP should include goals and accommodations to build English proficiency, while the IEP describes how the disability impacts learning and how language proficiency may affect service delivery assessments. So you kind of plan them together. Collaboration between the EL and the special language or special education staff is essential. The assessments and accommodations must align. Students with both plans are entitled to appropriate testing accommodations based on both disability and English proficiency. The IEP should include accommodations for state assessments and documentation on how and decisions were made, often with the input from the EL team. Kentucky has an accessibility and accommodations guide that you can find on KDE's website that provides details on allowable supports for dual status. Data from the ELP assessment must inform the IEP. Kentucky uses Access, like I said before, for ELL's assessment to measure English language proficiency. The IEP team should review the most recent Access scores to understand the student's proficiency level in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. So I would say cautiously proceed. When you have this student, don't jump right in and say they have a disability. Allow them some time, but don't delay it too far if you suspect that there's a disability. These scores help determine how language proficiency affects learning and whether goals, accommodation, and instructional strategies need adjustment. Progress must be monitored in both areas. Kentucky's results-driven accountability framework encourages monitoring results as well as compliance. So progress data in both areas are essential. Now, the next special factor comes under communication and deafness. Understanding the special factor. When a student is deaf or hard of hearing or has communication needs, the ARC must consider the student's language and communication mode. How are they speaking language? How are they using sign language? Do they need sign language? Do they need interpreters? Do they use cued speech? And to ensure the full supports are addressed, teachers must ensure that the ARC has recent data on how the student communicates across settings, including language proficiency, receptive and expressive communication, and the use of assistive technology. Hearing aids, FM systems, cochlear implants, those are all special factors that need to be addressed. And sometimes you're going to have to plan for training for your staff, and you would have to put that in the supports for school personnel. So you would have an account in the present level, you would have an account in the special factor, and then you might have it show up again in the supplementary aids and services. You may have a goal for it, and then you might have some training that's required for your personnel. Because if the teacher is wearing a FM system, they're going to need to know how to use that and make sure it's operational. So you need to know how to check to make sure the hearing aids are working properly. And you need to know about cochlear implants and what the processes are around those. And so that's a special factor that could be addressed through the IEP. When we look at the mode of communication, the ARC must address whether the student primarily uses spoken English, American Sign Language, or another mode. And that's things that you would discuss within that special factor around communication, in particular if the student's deaf or if they are hard of hearing. Lots of times your speech language pathologist will weigh in on the appropriate instructional supports as well. So it's a collaborative effort to meet that special factor. Access to direct communication. Federal and state guidelines emphasize that students who are deaf or hard of hearing should have direct communication access with peers and professional staff in their primary language or communication mode. So addressing this as a special factor is first determining what the mode is of communication, and then making sure that the students have access through that direct type of communication. And that takes planning, and that takes a lot of assessment information, and you have to make sure that the assessment information is documented correctly in the present levels, and then you address that through the special factors. This might mean assigning interpreters, ensuring captioning, using visual alerts or sound fill systems. All kinds of things could come up. And then you would document the impact on learning. The IEP must describe how the hearing loss affects the student's participation and progress in the general curriculum. That goes in the present levels. That's the adverse effect statement around that. And teachers document how communication barriers affect reading, writing, and social interaction. Now, when you talk about that in one section, let's say you talk about it in the communication section, it's always a good idea to link that communication difficulty to other sections if it's having an impact. And so we would need to really think about how that applies across the reading and writing, the academic sections, the social, emotional sections, and what accommodations are needed would then need to be documented in the supplementary aids and services portion of the IEP. In the special factors section of Kentucky's IEP form, the ARC must check yes for communication needs and or deaf or hard of hearing and provide a narrative explanation describing the student's communication strengths and needs, the primary language mode, and the supports for school personnel. So you get a hodgepodge of things that you're going to have to do. And this is one that's difficult to plan for. So if you have difficulties, you can always reach out to us. You can always reach out to your director, and we can plan for some training or for some support in that IEP area if it does arise. Now, you're also going to have a hearing impaired teacher that can work with students in this regard, just like you have a vision impaired teacher. So you could get some services that way, and you would just need to plan in conjunction with the impact on academics, the impact on socialization, the access piece, the accommodation piece, and make sure that everybody that's working on that student's plan or program is on the same page, and that all the things are documented through present levels, special factors, supplementary aids and services, goals, specially designed instruction, and all of that is consistent across the board. Special education teachers must be aware of collaborative requirements, working with teachers of the deaf or hard of hearing, and really look at receiving ongoing training in deaf culture, sign language basics, and inclusive classroom communication strategies. Assistive technology is a required special factor as well. This is one where districts have been cited lately. Okay, and what I mean by that, there's an ongoing monitoring of how teachers do IEPs and whether or not we're documenting it appropriately. I'm going to use an example here, and some of you are new to this profession, and so I'm going to use this example. Uh, let's say that the student is MMD. They have a mild mental disability. That means they have deficits that are great enough in mathematics to need a calculator. We have to document in the present level the need for a calculator. We need the data that says how the student does math at a particular level with the use of a calculator and without the use of a calculator. And we need to make sure that we raise that in the present level, and then we address the need for a calculator in the assistive technology section. And then we also need to document that discussion in our conference summary and in the IEP of about how we're going to address that throughout the rest of the conference or the rest of the IEP. We're going to need to put that in supplementary aids and services. We're going to need to also mark that appropriately. So what we're talking about is you've got a student that needs a calculator on the non-calculator portion of the state exam, the Kentucky Summative Assessment. And when you have that, when you mark that, you have to have a basis of need for that. And you have to address it under the assistive technology special factor, and then you have to put it in the supplementary aids and services. So that's that whole issue taken care of with. Now, of course, there's other assistive technology that students need from time to time. Sometimes they need speech to text. They need text to speech. They need, different types of technology. They could need something as simple as a pencil grip. But when we're talking about the use of a calculator on the state exam, we need to make sure that we got internal consistency in the IEP and make sure we're documenting that appropriately. Now, the definition of assistive technology, it's any piece of equipment, either acquired commercially, modified, or customized to increase, maintain, or improve the functional capabilities of a student with a disability. Assistive technology services, any service that directly assists the student in selection, acquisition, or use of an AT device. And these examples include some of the things I've already talked about: speech to text, communication boards or devices, screen readers, magnification tools, adaptive keyboards or switches, FM remotes, and microphone systems. So you can see how assistive technology might also be raised in another section of special factors. One of the things that we really need to be in tune with, especially if we work with students with low incidence disabilities, we need to make sure that they're communicating with us. That's the most basic form of communication. We need to explore all assistive technology to make sure that we've got a communication board, we've got a device in place so that we can meet the students' wants and needs, and we can have meaningful relationships, and we can give them access to the curriculum. So those are certainly reasons why we would do that. Under assistive technology, your responsibilities are to recognize the student's needs that might be addressed through assistive technology. We're supposed to consider that first. Consider the academic, communication, mobility, and daily living tasks that a student needs. If you're thinking about, that makes me think about also, if you're thinking about vision impairment, the student may need orientation or cane services. That's another special factor service that a student might need. And you would collaborate with specialists. You would integrate AT into the instruction and the daily routine, ensuring that the student knows how to use the devices. That can be specially designed instruction, teaching them how to know how to use those devices. And then monitor progress and effectiveness and train the general education teachers to also help with application and AT implementation across the board so that it's consistent in the student's life. And then you document it in the IEP in the special factors section, just like we said. Describe how it will be used, what type of AT device is required, and assign responsibility for implementation. Who's going to provide it? Make sure that everybody knows what their responsibilities are regarding that student. If you need to get training for a special person, then you would need to document that as well, and then document how effective it's increasing access and increasing the student's learning. So through progress data, you need to make sure that you're addressing that. Consider AT for all areas of functioning. Okay. AT is not just for academics. It's for communication, it's for mobility, it's for behavior. Okay. So you can use visual timers and cueing systems like we talked about earlier, adaptive equipment, canes and switches, text to speech, speech to text, braille displays for reading and writing. Assistive technology can hit all of those pieces. Now, there's sometimes a student needs an assistive technology evaluation, and we have folks, if you'll contact your director can get in contact with us. We can put you in contact with someone that can get you an assistive technology evaluation if the student needs that. AT is a required special factor. Under the Kentucky's IEP guidance document, you must consider whether a student requires it. And it should be the first thing you consider in place of human aids. Key takeaways for Kentucky special education teachers. AT is not optional. It must be considered for every student with a disability. Decisions must be data driven. Collaboration with AT specialists or related service providers. And regular progress monitoring should be ensured. We really appreciate your time. We really appreciate you being here. But that's a quick rundown of the 5 areas. And those special factors need to be consistent throughout the IEP. And like I said, we really appreciate you being here, and we're happy to help you in any way we can. Thank you guys so much.